Thank you. Thank you very much. Hi. That was a nice introduction. I was just thinking about George Bush while I was back there. Have you ever seen that video of him trying to open the door, which is locked? Thank you to the How To Academy. I'm from Yorkshire, so I thought it was the How Do Academy, but it's not. How do you know if someone's from Yorkshire? Yeah? Well, how do you know if somebody... I mean, I know you are now, because within 10 seconds of meeting them, they tell you. Thank you to Conway Hall as well, one of the great halls of the UK, really, with its storied history. Space. And if you don't think it's the final frontier, you're going to have to explain to me what lies afterwards, because I can't work it out. Why did I write about it? Because George Orwell, who probably has spoken here, once said that one of the hardest things to see is what's right in front of your nose. And it was right in front of my nose for a very long time. I write about geopolitics. Geopolitics is now in space. Duh. And here we are. It's not bad. It's not only about geopolitics. I couldn't resist the inner hippie in me from coming out. And so you have to go with the first chapter, should you read it. It's all a bit sort of chin-strokey, gazing into the middle distance. You know, why do we have this relationship with this? And it is because it is to be human to do that. And we've always done it. All of us, all cultures, all peoples. We've always looked up and we've asked them very basic questions. One of the most basic, why is there something rather than nothing? And if you want to melt your brain, just think about that later. I mean, why is there something? Because you can't imagine nothing. And so it's inevitable that we do this. Like I said, the first chapter, I actually couldn't resist it. About 30,000 years ago was the first potential evidence that we were measuring, as well as asking. We were actually measuring. It's a contested view, but some of the prehistorians have found bones with a series of 28 markings on them. So they're probably marking the passage of the moon. Certainly about 12,000 years ago, I'm hoping to see these this summer. It's the cave paintings, Lascaux in France, in the Dordogne. Again, this is contested, but it's thought they might be looking at that. And from about 12,000 years ago, we really accelerate, because that's also when we began to stop being hunter-gatherers. And if you're static, you better know about the seasons, and you haven't got a watch or an iPhone, so you better keep a very close eye on what's going on. It's interesting that in France, they saw the pattern of a bull, because much further south, let's say what is now Mali or somewhere, they would look at exactly the same piece of sky and they would see a scorpion, because we are hardwired to see patterns, but of course you see it through the prism of your own culture. So we begin to accelerate, and the Babylonians took it on, the Egyptians. I'm very glad that the Egyptians didn't make the breakthroughs that the Greeks did, because the Egyptians had a 10-day week. What a terrible idea. 3 series of 10. I mean, thank goodness for God, eh? Came along, said, fancy a rest. Unions came along, fancy another day off. We've got it sorted. Anyway, this is the Greeks, and they really accelerated, and they were the ones who really put empiricism into it. And this is the acceleration of science. And what science has done is let us escape from the gods and the ghosts. I'm not anti-religious, but I think it's very important that we separate science from religion. And they were the ones who began to do that through empiricism. And also they were the ones that really separated astrology from astronomy. The Romans were obsessed with astrology, and they were far too busy working out, whether June is in the something, whatever it is that people interested in astrology say. June is in the Mendips. I don't know what. I don't follow astrology, which is probably why they never saw the end of the Roman Empire coming. Whereas the Greeks, there's an old Fleet Street story, I don't know if it's true, when Mystic Meg For younger people, she was the woman on telly who did the, I see the future. She allegedly was fired with the following letter. As you're probably already aware. Love that. I don't know if it's true or not. Where was I? I was in Greece. Yeah, so they are really accelerating, really using empiricism, and they are noticing things that, not just over a month and then over a period of 365 days, which makes one period of time. They were starting to measure things over decades and realizing that things were coming around again and again. These guys worked out how far it was to the moon. I could live 1,000 years. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. Excuse me, sorry. It's so blindingly obvious. You're watching a ship go out, and its sails get lower and lower and lower on the horizon, and of course you think, bye. But if you're Greek, you think, the world must be round. I mean, again, I could watch it go for 1,000 years, 1,000 ships. Never entered my head. So they were pretty good. They even did the Astra Lab. This was the iPhone of its day. Tell you astrology, tell you astronomy, tell you what day it is, tell you the time, tell you which direction to go on, had all these different plates. It was used for 1,500 years, this piece of kit. Didn't have a built-in sell date like the iPhone. Columbus would have had one when he went out. The Greeks, they were amazing. So your starter for 10. Does anyone know who that is? Close enough, Copernicus. Begins with a K. I mean, there's a whole bunch of people I can put in, but again, this is about the gods and the ghosts. Copernicus, we were very lucky that his parents said to him when he was a kid, the sun doesn't revolve around you. Thank you. There's only a couple more. Just Google space jokes, all right? Imagine the revolutionary idea, and obviously not everyone just woke up one morning and thought this, but people knew before, but he was introducing it in very careful language, so as not to be burnt. If, in fact, the Earth goes around the sun, and if, just to make sure he went to prison anyway, but the ifs probably saved his life. But hang on a minute, for the last 1,800 years, we've been told that we are the center of the universe, the Earth. We are hanging here in space and everything is revolving around us because that is God's plan. And also, there is a hierarchy, and we are at its top. And then it's suddenly getting challenged. And again, these are the accelerators that allow us to embrace science, because without the science, we're doomed. There was an interlude when the Chinese were really going gangbusters for space and understanding it. Did a lot of amazing work. Now, you can't rule out that he was the first man to reach the moon. Wan Hu. 1500s. He's a household name in some households in China. His servants put the rockets, because they invented gunpowder, under his chair, lit the blue touch paper, and he retired. Possibly to that crater there, which the Chinese have named after him. So there is no empirical evidence that he got there, but you can't rule it out. Moving on. Everybody knows who that is. Don't they? Newton. Again, another accelerator of our knowledge. The fella off the TV ads as well, which there should be a law against. Of course, the joke about him is that he wrote this theory in, around about 1910, and everybody says, well, it was about time. Thank you. That's probably the last one. I love that one. Anyway, again, but real accelerators, we're really diverging now, and we're building. But I defy anyone, and I'm going to be very impressed, not only if you know his name, but if you can pronounce it. Because I can only do one of those things. This is like the University Challenge. Come on, be brave. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky. Usual spelling. I don't have heroes, but he's a hero of mine. Again, I'm taking it through the book that, we go through this period of wonder, we go through this period of science, and then we stand on the brink. And he is the guy that got us off the brink and through the atmosphere, because he is the Russian chap, left school at 14, self-taught. I left school at 16. No, I was invited to leave school at 16. And I don't matter how much I was taught myself, I would never work out escape velocity. He was the first person in the world to work out how fast you need to go vertically, for how long, with how much fuel, escape velocity. Absolute household name in the space community. About 10 years before Kitty Hawk, or Wright Brothers 1, as it's actually officially called, took off, 1903. This guy was designing space stations with airlocks so they could dock with each other. Talking about the 1890s. This guy was designing space suits for spacewalks, space elevators, which we still don't even have, but everyone knows theoretically they'll work. I mean, the guy's an absolute genius, and hardly anyone knows his name. In the space world, they do. Manga, for some reason, loves it. That's usual spelling. Yeah. He is known in Russia, but he's just not known elsewhere. There's an episode of Star Trek, and one of the ships is called Tsiolkovsky. So, again, I go through these great names because, I think they deserve to be known as much as, say, Armstrong or Gagarin. He also knew what would happen. We will launch, and we do launch, mostly from the west to the east, because that is the direction the Earth spins. Well, it doesn't, because there's no west or east. There's no up or down. These things don't exist. There's no left or right. But none of us would have got here today if we didn't have these concepts. But of course, they don't really exist. They're just ways to get us to understand the world. So it goes that way, and therefore our rockets go that way in order to get the acceleration. So that's my first example of geography of space. You also try to launch as close to the equator as possible, because in very loose scientific language, the Earth spins faster at the equator. So you get even more of a liftoff. So Cape Canaveral, whose dialing tone is genuinely 54321. Love that. Russians were in Kazakhstan because they controlled it and it was closer to the equator. The loss of their empire means they built one inside the Russian borders now. France and the Europeans use Guyana, French Guyana in Latin America, and we use Cornwall. It's worth having a little dig, but actually, no, the launch is there underneath a plane, and then the rocket goes. It's not a vertical launch. We are building a vertical launch site in Sutherland in Scotland. They've broken ground. It's going to take small rockets with small satellites up. Should be ready in 3 or 4 years. Britain is actually one of the leading second-tier space powers. It is. Hard to get out. Very hard. It's 62 miles up, if you believe the Kármán line is where the line is. Nearly everybody does, but it's not fully accepted exactly where space starts. Geography of space, it's important, because if I say it starts at 62 miles and I've got a permanent satellite over you, or either near Earth orbit, but the people I'm above think it starts at 80 miles up, we might have an argument. I've always felt sorry for the mesosphere. Got left out. Nobody ever says that's mesospheric. But it's hard. It's hard. Look at that geography. Look how hard it is to get that piece of metal just up to the stratosphere. And they're going even harder. It is rocket science. And bringing us almost up to date, of course we're going to take politics there. We've taken it everywhere else we've been. And of course we're going to take the military there. We've done that. Every technology. When we invented ships, we invented warships. When we invented planes, bombers. It's a byproduct. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. When we invented the internet, along came Twitter. There's always negatives. Gutenberg Press, people started writing books proving that witches were real. These things always happen. I think you have to be sanguine and focused simultaneously. So, The politics of it. We're going back to the moon in 2 years. I say we, common humanity. Why is it nearly, nearly 60 years since we've been? Because we went and the Americans won, because it was a political race. It was an ideological race. And in 1957, it was 1-0 to the Russians. You like space, don't you? Do you know what that is?
Sputnik.
Yeah, Sputnik. Did you know that the Russians shone it, they polished it, it's a true story, they shone it so brightly that the Americans that had telescopes, every time it went over, they could see it. Which was really annoying, because this was a battle against Russian-Soviet communism and the American capitalist open democracy culture and education and science. And it was very, very important to win it, because these were difficult times. So the Americans were very close. They almost matched each other for the best part of a decade, but 1-0 to the Russians. So a few days later, the Americans thought, because they were just about ready, we've got to get our own satellite up. It's just a few days later, off they went. Headlines the next day were flopnik. Yeah, that's a sort of refusenik. Of course, that was on the news. But of course, the Soviets had X examples of doing that, but in a closed society, their publics were not allowed to know about it. But of course, the Russians had a good laugh about it. And then a couple of years later, it's 2-0. I don't speak Russian, but I'm told that you can hear Gagarin saying, "Let's go," because the Russians don't do a countdown. Now, can anyone in the audience tell me why you should do 10, 9, 8? Why? You don't get in your car, do you, and go, I might start doing that. Ignition, yeah. It's just nuts. But I like it, it's good. That's why it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 at Cape Canaveral. But allegedly, you can just hear Gagarin, the first man into space, saying, "Let's go." Escape velocity. They've got it. They burn, even now, an Olympic-sized swimming pool full of fuel just to get out. That's a lot of fuel. 2-0 to the Soviets. This is problematic. It's now open source material, but I looked at the communiques that the embassies around the world were sending into the United States, and the American allies were worried. Hang on a minute, are we backing the wrong horse here? Or more, are we putting too much weight on one side in this great 20th century intellectual struggle, political intellectual struggle? In international relations, unless you're completely wedded as a treaty ally, like Japan and the Americans are treaty allies, I think the Philippines, Australia, treaty allies with the Americans, it's about how much weight you put as you balance. Some countries are better than others at it. India is a master at balancing. That's why they led the non-aligned movement. And it's similar today, let's say, with Taiwan. In Taiwan at the moment, it's not always completely about Taiwan. It's about the Western Pacific. Because if Biden doesn't say, with a degree of strategic ambiguity, we will fight for them. And in the event that such a thing came to pass, that they were invaded and the Americans did not fight for them, I'm not saying they should or they should not, I'm saying this is how international relations works. If they don't fight for Taiwan, at that point, the Philippines will go like that towards the Chinese. They will balance towards the Chinese. They will have no choice. They have territorial disputes with the Chinese. They are no match for the Chinese. With the Americans they are, but without them they're not. So the moment the Americans don't fight for Taiwan, it's done. They will lean that way. South Korea will probably say, please send your troops home, and lean that way. Japan might well become a nuclear power. And it was the same the rationale was the same in the 60s. And once all that happened that I've just laid out, the Americans themselves will be in some difficulty. Guam would be very isolated. They would have to retreat back to Hawaii, and the Pacific would be split in half. Chinese half, American half. So it's not just about Taiwan. Sorry. I want one of those Madonna ones. Sorry. So, they used to call me small ears at school. So all these communiques are going in. Hang on a minute, and they're saying, our allies are saying, are they going to lose this? Are the Soviets superior? Should we start making overtures to be a little bit more friendly with the Soviets? And Kennedy's great speech is called the Moonshot Speech. And he said along the lines of, we go to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And if anybody watches The Simpsons, he went on to become Mayor Quimby of Springfield. He is. That's why Mayor Quimby talks like that. Anyway, I came across a different speech in Congress because it lays bare the politics of it. He actually says, basically, we've got to get to the moon to persuade people to be on our side.
The dramatic achievements in space which occurred in recent weeks should have made clear to us all, as did the Sputnik in 1957, the impact of this adventure on the minds of men everywhere who are attempting to make a determination of which road they should take. Which road?
Well, most people took the American road, and America, they did. They won that space race. The Soviets then pretended they weren't even trying, and they kept that pretense up all the way to the early 1990s when the vaults were opened, and it was blindingly obvious that they were desperate to get to the moon first, but they didn't make it. But yeah, it makes some great reading, the open source material that was released once communism fell. Now, as an aside, this is why the Americans go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Wernher von Braun, Nazi rocket scientist, designed the V2, fell in many locations very close to here. And in 1945, the Americans got to him first, and about 120 of his scientists shipped them all off to America, whitewashed their pasts, because he was a Nazi in the Nazi party. He ended up on the Disney Channel, had his own series. It's a bit weird, but there we are. And masterminded the Apollo project, because he was a rocket genius. Kolarov was his opposite number in Russia. But Russians got the B team, and the French got the C team. But hundreds of German scientists were shipped out. Anyway, as a young man, Wernher von Braun went to the cinema, and you might probably be familiar with Metropolis, the Fritz Lang film, the great silent movie, one of the great silent movies. He also made Frau im Mond, Woman in the Moon. And to add the tension, the dramatic tension to the silent movie, he stuck in a countdown. Not bad, is it? It's actually, honestly, it sustains for about 70 minutes. If you're interested in the history of movie making, it is worth a watch. And that's why the Americans go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. I mean, it's just weird. Because Wernher von Braun realized where he was, and America is Hollywood, and America is showy, and America likes a narrative. So he just introduced it, right? When we do rockets, we will count down 10, 9, and then we'll press the button. It's a bit odd, but we're so used to it, it's not odd that they count down. The Russians do something different. On the way to the launch pad, Gagarin needed to go to the loo. And he got off, and he had a little wheel on the back wheel of the cart that was taking it. And to this day, every single Russian rocket launch with an astronaut, they do the same thing. And if they're women, they take a little flask and do the same thing. I think, no, industries need this sort of, collective memory. Anyway, moving on. They won. They did it. And how come it's flying when there's no wind? Because they put a metal rod in it. I can't stand all that. So, how come there's a shadow? Oh, God. Anyway, they did it. And they're going back. So, before it was ideological. Before they were spending 0.5% of GDP on NASA. Now they're only spending 0.2%. It's a lot cheaper to get into space now for a whole bunch of reasons. And there's a whole bunch of reasons to go and to have a new space era. And it's to do with geography. Starting in, we've done the equator, we've done west to east, low Earth orbit. It's getting crowded. 8,000 working satellites, 3,000 non-working satellites. Musk intends to put a minimum of 10,000 satellites up this decade. The Chinese are going to put another 10,000 satellites up this decade, and they're all going to be in low Earth orbit. It's a big place. For example, the distance between low Earth orbit and geosynchronous orbit is 190 times greater than the volume of the Earth. It's a big place. You can hide spaceships there. The Americans have got a space plane, and they had it for 2 years, a robotic space plane. They had it for 2 years out in that area without anybody spotting it, because it's a huge, huge area, and it's a tiny little space plane. 2 years, though, and then they flew it back in. No one's quite sure what it was doing. Well, it was a test of some sort. So low Earth orbit is where many of the satellites are that are integral to our way of life now. We can't operate our economies without having a presence in low Earth orbit. 80 countries are there now. So that's part of the geography. Geosynchronous orbit is really important because the orbit turns at the same speed that the Earth turns, so you're constantly over the same piece of land, which is very, very useful. Very useful for a number of things. Television, perhaps, or spying. If you want to look at exactly the same piece of territory, it's useful. From low Earth orbit, you can, at military grade, which is not sold on the open market, the cameras can they can tell what door you're walking into in a big building in a street. I have a line in the book that they used to be able to see it might be James Bond. Now they can see what name of sunglasses James Bond's wearing. It's not quite that good, but military grade is getting better. They don't sell it to commercial. So it's pretty useful to have that kit up in geosynchronous. And then, of course, the moon. Now, you can have the radiation belt. Nobody wants it. But I want geosynchronous orbit because there's only so many licenses that are issued every year because of the communications problems. You have to be spaced not too close to each other, although there is actually no laws about exactly how close. There's only so many licenses. So this is prime real estate, and you want it. And there's a lot of people that want it as well.